fired up? So make some noise if you're looking for a really good show. And make some more noise if you feel like getting fired up by our special guest. More noise, yeah. That's right. That's right. So welcome to the beautiful Greenway Court Theater. I'm Tony, this is Adam. We are two left-handed lawyers making the case for reparations. One story at a time. There has never been more conversation and engagement around the issue of reparations in our nation's history than what we're experiencing right at this particular moment. And so our goal, one of our main goals, is to continue to spark thought and engagement and discussion around the issue of reparations, leading towards some action, right? Let's make reparations happen. So we are delighted to be here. We're delighted to have you here with us. So thank you for coming out to join us, and let's get it on, right? In the words of Marvin Gaye. So we want to take a moment up front to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relations past, present, and emerging. And reckoning and truth-telling is one of the key components of reparations. That's one of the main aspects. Many reparations scholars will say that it starts with telling the truth, that you can't get to reparations without us first being truthful and honest about our history. And so we ask, that we all consider, what does it mean? What would it look like to fully acknowledge our presence on stolen land?
So welcome, everybody. It's amazing to have you all here. And it's hard to believe that less than a year ago, we had our first live show ever at the Greenway Court Theater with special guest Robin Kelly. And in the audience that night, there was a gentleman who we had heard about who made quite a name for himself already at a very young age down in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was taking on giant corporations, taking names and getting results and organizing people and inspiring people. And he was here that night. His name is Justin Pearson. And Tony and I were talking, we have to get this guy as a guest on the podcast. And we were very excited to try to make that happen, started sort of lobbying a little bit. And as luck would have it, that was right before the rocket ship took off. That was his political career, the next month, basically. It was an amazing series of events that you probably heard a lot about. He was elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives, and a whole series of adventures in democracy, or trying to have democracy down there with some corrupt politicians and the gun lobby. And you've heard about the Tennessee Three and what happened. And the politicians in Tennessee had an idea to sort of shut down this democracy and shut down the dialogue. Well, like a lot of guns, that idea backfired really hard. And basically, the issue of gun control and gun violence was brought much, much higher. And Representative Justin Pearson launched on his political career. So he was reinstated, reelected, and back in the State House, and immediately taking names. And so Tony and I were figuring, okay, this is not likely to happen with the podcast. He's going to the White House, he's being interviewed everywhere. But guess what? He's back, and he's here tonight. We have to pinch ourselves. He's taking time from his crazy busy schedule to join us. One of the most exciting new progressive voices in America is here with us tonight. Representing the 86th District in the Tennessee House of Representatives, please help us welcome, to pay the tab, Representative Justin J. Pearson.
So Representative Pearson, welcome to Pay the Tab.
Thank you so much. Glad to be back.
Good. Glad to have you back. As Adam mentioned, you were here last February for our first live show with Robin Kelly, who sends his regards and regrets he can't be here tonight. I think you all were back in that corner somewhere. And as Adam alluded to, the world changed very drastically shortly thereafter or along the way. You were elected to a vacant seat in the Tennessee House, in a landslide. You were involved at the center of a showdown on the House floor over gun protests. We'll get into that. You were expelled, boo, right? And then reinstated, reelected, and along the way became an international figure. The whole world was wondering, who is this cat with an afro from the 70s, right? Who's spitting fire and raising all kind of heck down there. It's been quite a year, huh? Yeah.
Yes, it has. It's been an amazing year and extraordinary in so many ways. But I want to first thank my fiance, Oceanae Argillium. She made sure we came here to this show. She loves Tony and Adam and the work and the advocacy of reparations. And our life did change quite a bit after the show. So there's something to coming here. So good for everybody who's here and who's streaming.
So first question is, how have you kept your head straight through all this? Like, how have you sort of, maintained some sense of just, moving forward and balance?
Thank you for the question. Look, I think our values guide us. Never expected to be expelled from the Tennessee General Assembly. Did not expect to be going to the Oval Office and meeting with the president and vice president. Never anticipated being invited to be on this show and coming and speak on Dr. King Weekend. Those weren't things that you plan. What we knew and what we know now, and many people across the country are paying attention to, is gun violence is the number one killer of children in our country and in our state in Tennessee. 1 year ago, just a couple of days ago, we had the anniversary of one of my classmates, Larry Thorne, who was killed last year due to gun violence. Going to the well of the House floor was about elevating the voices of people who could speak no more. And it was about resisting an institution baked in white supremacy and white patriarchy that tells people of color and young folks to be quiet, or we'll turn off your mics, or we'll ignore you when your hand's raised, because what you have to say or what your district needs to say doesn't deserve to be heard. And so then, as with now, a whole lot has happened. We've been able to travel and go places together and meet so many wonderful people, but our values are what we lead with. And the belief in God, the belief in justice, the belief in love are grounding. Because just as we see so much good happening, kids marching and protesting and walking out of school and demanding gun control legislation and these amazing things happening, we also see, a lot of folks supporting the status quo.
Sure.
Refusing to pass legislation, refusing to listen to those voices. And so we have to remain steadfast and rooted in our values. And I think that not only gives hope, but that helps to ground us in this moment, because we're in this for a lifetime.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So let's go back to the beginning, your early days. You're a young cat, so it wasn't that long ago, but yeah. So as we understand it, you ran for president in the kindergarten and first grade, right? And I understand also that you brought your teachers to tears with one of your campaign speeches. I don't know if that was kindergarten or first grade. I don't know which speech it was, but one of them. Fast forward to the 10th grade, you messed around and got a principal in trouble. Apparently, the school was having textbooks held in storage. They were fearful that the students might misplace them or lose them, I think as it was. And Representative Pearson was like, no, we aren't having that. We need these books. Protested at a board meeting. The principal ended up getting admonished, ordered the books to be released from captivity, right? Moved on, fast forward, age 26, you helped build a coalition to defeat a multi-billion-dollar corporations that were trying to build a oil pipeline, right through the heart of Memphis's black community, Southwest Memphis. So clearly there's a pattern that was set at an early age and has continued. Two questions. What has compelled you to take action? One, and two, what is it that, what is it within you that made you think that you were the cat to do that was something for you to do?
Y'all tell he research? Like he went to Harvard Law or something. I don't know. Golly. Thank you for the thoughtful question, the well-researched question. That everybody don't even know that. I'm like, where'd you find that out, Tony? Look, I have always wanted for the conditions that my family was in. We grew up financially poor, spiritually rich, to be better. And I always believed that it was possible. Whether it was me or somebody else, I knew that the opportunity existed for things to be better than they were. And whether that was in first grade or in 10th grade. But what really happened, I had exposure to a different way of life. So before 10th grade, I lived in Virginia for 5 years. My dad had the good fortune of going and earning a master's degree at Howard University. HU, anybody? Just say you know back. You know, okay, all right. My dad went to Howard University. My parents, extraordinary. They had kids as teenagers, right? Then they heard one sermon in 1995 called Vision 2000. 1995 was a good year because what else happened in 1995? I was born. Yeah. They hear the sermon. I thought it, I caught it, I saw it, I bought it, and now I've gotten it. They go home. They take a piece of paper. They start writing down, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? My mom's going to earn a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree. My dad's going to earn a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree. We're going to literally take our 5 children and lift them up out of poverty. And this is what the plan is. We've seen it. And over the next 14 years of my life, they do it. I witnessed them. I went to all the graduations. One of my first memories is my mom getting her bachelor's degree and losing my granddaddy's ring. That's probably why I remember it. It's a big diamond ring. I witnessed this happening, people choosing, right? Choosing to care about folks who are not themselves, making sacrifices in order to build a better life for their kids, but then they return home. And I return home different. Our situation is different. One of my grandmothers, God rest her soul, has died from cancer in our community that has 17 toxic release inventory facilities, which we can talk about. But we return, and I go to Mitchell High School, and this is the situation. You're going into classrooms, and there aren't teachers. You have one textbook. The only textbook I ever got was in geometry. But what had I experienced? What had I been exposed to? People being able to have after-school programs and a bus take them home. You having a textbook at home and at school. You need a tutor, tutors being available to you. You don't have a computer at home? Well, we've got one at the school that opens an hour and a half before school starts, so you have access to it. What I saw was that when you were in the middle class and upper class community, resources were provided for you to be successful. But being in Memphis, in Southwest Memphis, where we have been for 4 generations, being at Mitchell High School, where it was 99.9% black, African American, 99.9% of kids on free and reduced lunch, the investment was not there. And so going to the school board was really a speech saying, I know it can be different, because I actually have seen it and have experienced it, and it is a choice being made by people in more powerful positions for us not to get the resources that we need. But the kicker of the whole thing is the expectations are the same. For the kids that get all the resources and for the kids that get none of them. Our society says you need to be just as successful. And so it wasn't that I thought, Justin is the only one that can fix it. You know, there's a president that says that. It's that somebody's got to do it. And why not you? Why can't it be you who speak up? Why can't it be you who fight back? Why can't it be you who say something? And maybe that'll encourage more people to do so.
Got it. So, yeah, right. This is more of an observation than a question. So your mother is a teacher, your father's a preacher, and you seem to have a little bit of both in you, right? Yeah.
Osmosis. I got both of them. Thank God for it. But I'm going to keep my answers short so we have time for Q&A.
Powerful combination, yeah. Well, as you know, we talk about racial injustice and justice on Pay the Tab, and we want to go into some issues with you. So we know you've spoken a lot about environmental racism. That's a term that you've written on and spoken on, and we want to dive into that. So you start off maybe just tell folks in general, what that means. What are we talking about, environmental racism? What is that?
Oh, great question. Environmental racism is the burden that communities of color, especially black folks, indigenous folks, have in their communities by having more polluters and pollution and toxic facilities surrounding them. And so the reality that your wastewater treatment plant is likely in a black community. The steel plant is likely in a black community. For me, Valero oil refinery, the oil refineries, believe it or not, they are not in the wealthy white suburbs. They are very likely in black communities and poor communities and communities of color. So environmental racism is the system that creates the policies that ensures that that replicates. Regardless of all the advocacy, regardless of all the years that pass by, we have a system that reproduces environmental racism and ultimately health harms and other harms to our community.
Right, so these are choices being made at the higher levels, where to cite these things, right? And then what are some of the effects on the communities when you have these toxic sites and so forth in the neighborhoods? What are the results?
Yep. Let me put a pin on this even more when it comes to choices, because this is really important, because even and I'm going to talk about it a lot today, I'm talking about systems and systems change and how the systems and systemic inequality and stuff is working, but let's just make this plain, and I'll use Southwest Memphis, is where I'm from. Redlining, folks here know redlining, have heard the term redlining. Read Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, it's a great book, y'all know it, like read it, it's really good for normal people too. Decisions were made about who would get home loans. And communities that had more black folk, even with just one person who was a black person or person of color owning a home, their community would be redlined, right? And so black folk could get access to homes in places that were literally red, and the government would subsidize the loans in those areas. These same maps, if you overlay them now with toxic facilities, are where industrial parks were approved. And so the places where we were forced to live become the places that get chosen for toxic facilities and industrial facilities to be placed. These are decisions that people have made. And land use control boards to this day continue to approve polluters and polluting facilities to go in these communities that are still suffering from the decision somebody made 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago to redline the communities. And the effects are tremendous. The effects are an increase in cancer. Both of my grandmothers have died of cancer living in 38109, where there are 17 of these toxic facilities surrounding the community. The effects are black children who have an asthma attack are 10 times more likely to die from their asthma attack than their white counterparts. In our hospitals, Le Bonheur, it was one of the children's hospitals, the top floor, dealing with respiratory illnesses, are filled with children who are living around these facilities. The consequences are the health issues and the other social determinants that come with that. Because the places that are polluted the most have the highest amount of poverty, have the fewest amount of people in jobs that have health insurance. And so the intersectional and interlocking injustices that are experienced that quite literally first take your breath away are the same ones that don't pay you enough to be able to pay a fair market value for your property, and are the same places that do not have health insurance for when you are sick. This is the chant of 2020, many of us remember, right? I can't breathe. That's still the chant. We still cannot breathe under the economic or the environmental or the social pressures of injustice that we experience.
Yeah, well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the struggle you got involved in when we first heard about your work with the proposed oil pipeline in South Memphis, right, where a couple of multi-billion-dollar corporations had plans to build a pipeline, right, and they made a very conscious choice of where to locate the pipeline, as we understand it, right, and some stuff came out about some private board meetings where they talked about the path of least resistance, and what were they talking about that, and maybe you can tell us how you became involved with that struggle.
So in 2020, do y'all remember 2020? A lot happening. A lot happened in 2020, right? We had this global pandemic that shook the entire world. We've lost over 6 million people to date from the COVID-19 virus. At the same time, we had the lynchings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and a lot of people, particularly white people, woke up saying like, wait, black people experience America differently? right? Like we had a lot of people who tried to get a little bit more conscious for a little bit of time going on then. But a lot of us were experiencing pain because in our community, we lost more people due to COVID-19 because of comorbidities, which was people had underlying health issues to begin with. They had more COPD, had more asthma-related illnesses at the start of the pandemic. And then we heard about this plan, this Byhalia Connection Pipeline, that was going to double the output of oil at Valero Oil Refinery. The environment in which people were born and were living was already making them more susceptible to illnesses. And so when we learned about this project in this environment, right, with that understanding, these black lynchings going on, a lot of our community members unfortunately dying. We know one of my goddads passed away from COVID-19. And then we read the news story that says the pipeline company land agent said they chose to put this crude oil pipeline through this community because it is the path of least resistance.
On the record said that.
On the record said this. He got fired. Ultimately, because see, the one trickery about these corporations is you're not supposed to tell the truth. And the reason I was never afraid when they went before city council or county commission or anything, I said, because if they tell the truth, we'll win. Because they spend a whole lot of money on PR campaigns and stuff like that to obfuscate. But when the truth is told, they look at the same history that we do. They say, in this community, they're deprived of economic opportunity. In this community, they're deprived of educational opportunities. In this community, they don't have healthcare access. They don't have lawyers that they can call. In this community, the politicians who've been in office for a very long time don't invest in them, don't show up to their meetings. And so this is a path of least resistance because this is a place that can be exploited. And so the disruption, the only disruption that is possible in the places that they call paths of least resistance is for the people who are in those communities who are very resilient, who are very powerful, is to be empowered with resources to fight back. And so October 17, 2020, we organized. And the Neighborhood Association of Boxtown and Westwood and Walker Homes and West Junction, of folks who had been fighting for months and even years before I had gotten back home from the pandemic. They got together, and we started to call some other organizations, Protect Our Aquifer, which is a white-led organization who was focused on water quality. We called them and said, what do you know? What information do you have? And they said, well, we know some attorneys at the Southern Environmental Law Center. I was on Slack, met some attorneys from Portland, Oregon. They were actually our first coalition partner from Portland. God bless Nick and Jay, right? From Portland, Oregon. And they say, look, we want to find out a way to help. And what I have learned is that when we started to ask and advocate for our community, a coalition of yeses formed. And I think a lot of times it can be fear that people are going to say, no, I'm not interested, I don't care, that you all don't really matter, your opinion doesn't matter, because we've heard that before, right? And so that's how, because we're in the situation we're in now. So we've heard that. We've seen people not invest and not care. But when we get this coalition of yeses and we get organizations paying attention that we never thought would, people keep showing up. And you hold rally after rally after rally, rally for landowners, rally for water. You march down Main Street to the city council. We organize people power in a very meaningful and a tangible way that hasn't been done in a very long time with a multiracial movement for justice. And Vice President
you don't hear that every day.
Right, which was what we need. Because the only way we're going to win is if we have a multiracial, intergenerational movement for justice. No one person, no one organization, no one group, no one ethnicity is going to win this on our own. Because we are interconnected in this struggle. And it wasn't until people in the wealthier parts of Memphis realized that if this pipeline came through, they were going to poison all of our water, that they woke up and said, I better be invested in the black folks losing their land, because though it's not my land, we all do share this water. And I don't know if y'all know this. I'm going to stop. But we share this planet. And so if we keep allowing these corporations like Valero and Plains All American to exploit people, poor people and black people and indigenous people and communities of color, we all will suffer.
That's great. So what happened?
We won. We won, and we didn't stop there. They canceled the pipeline, but what was the problem? The laws weren't just. So we kept marching. We kept organizing, and we marched to City Hall and to County Commission, and we passed 3 laws, 2 at the City Council and 1 at the County Commission. Then, of course, the Republicans in Nashville wanted to undo what we did, so we had to march up to Nashville for an entire month, 4 times, to change a law. Listen, we changed a law in the Republican legislature to make it more just. Got 3 amendments to a Republican bill that if it has to go to court, we're pretty sure we're going to win. So God bless us, bless all the lawyers for that too.
So they already knew you at the State House early
Before
on.
we got
it
there,
sounds
yeah.
like, yeah.
It's probably why they didn't like me very much, Adam. But yeah, we had been there before. And for all of you who care about public service and are in public service, it is what we do before titles and positions that really matters. It's because we attach ourselves to people and to causes that matter, right? That if you ever choose to run for office, I believe the people that you marched with and that you called and that you showed up with and on behalf of, that they see you as a person who can serve. And I'm so humbled to serve District 86 and so honored to. But yeah, we were in a fight for the intangibles, right? Black folks' land been taken for a long time. Water will be the cause of a lot of wars going into the future, right? Like, we have to protect these things, and we have to do it for each other, for all of us, and for future generations of people. And that's what propelled us, especially when things got really hard.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So environmental racism is a real thing, not just in Tennessee, Memphis, but in most parts of the country. We have that experience here in Southern California, right? If we look to see where, oil wells are sited, where toxic dump sites are located, and it's virtually always impacting folks of color, black, brown, indigenous. So let's shift to some reparations for environmental racism, right? What are some of the repairs? So we talked about the medical fallout from asthma, lung cancer, breast cancer, chronic pulmonary disease. So just on the health care tip, what would you suggest might be a good repair-area?
Health care for everybody.
Okay, free.
For free.
For free.
Yes.
Free health care for everybody. It is imperative upon government to provide universal health care to folks. That's one thing that we must do.
Hear, hear.
And we have to more immediately provide testing for cancer in our communities. An ethylene oxide plant, I'm not sure if you all saw the news about this, there's some ethylene oxide plants around the country that are 40 times more cancerous than the EPA thought they were about 30 years ago. And so in one track of District 86, over 90% of the cancer can be attributed to this one facility that we got shut down. And they're leaving in April. Again, a people-powered movement led by Memphis Community Against Pollution. Yeah, with my brother at the helm. Closed them down. But there's some real immediate tests that need to be done for people to know what's happening. Because the sooner, you all know this, right? The sooner you get tested, the sooner you find out what's wrong, the quicker you can get people help. And I wish my grandmothers had that. And so that's something we can do. The other thing is these polluters need to be shut down. We can find better ways to electrify. We can find better ways to do the things that these polluters are doing with the technology that we have, with the educated people that we have, with the resources that are currently existing. The status quo is killing people. It is. Yeah. And these polluters are committing acts of violence and slow lynching in our communities.
Right.
And so we've got to stop them and shut them down. That is one of the ways to repair the harm is you stop it. Longer term reality is because the care about where these facilities were when they were initially built in like black communities and communities of color and indigenous communities, a lot of folks didn't pay attention, right? And so now we've got this thing called the climate crisis. But if we had cared which communities were being impacted when these institutions were being placed, we wouldn't have the crisis that we do now. Mm-hmm. But guess who's going to be impacted the worst by climate change? The very communities that had the least to do with creating it. Mm-hmm. And so how do we repair that harm? We have to prepare people's homes for it being hotter than anyone has ever expected. Mm-hmm. And for it being colder than anyone has ever expected. There has to be weatherization programs dedicated to our communities financially. And then the reality is there's been and has been like losses that there does need to be financial reparation for these communities. And so I don't have all the answers.
Yeah. No, I get it.
But I do know there are some smart folk who can make sure that we help those who have been hurt and marginalized the most.
And something that you said when we spoke previously wasn't a specific suggestion for reparations, but more of a general framework. You said, look, let's examine the conditions in healthier and wealthier neighborhoods and replicate that.
Just that.
Right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If you look at your lives and you say, here are the things that helped me. Folks had a good job. Mom was educated, I had schooling, I had a mentor who really listened to me, who really encouraged me. Just like, what are the conditions that made you successful? Why can't everybody have that? Why is it that you have to be deserving to have a car in your driveway that works? To have a house that has the lights on? I've had nights where the lights weren't on at my house. We used a flashlight and candles. A washer and dryer that works. I've had nights where I had to wash my clothes in a tub. Yeah, I ain't always looked like this and been here. But how do we replicate the good that other communities seem to have and the privileges that they have because of whiteness, because of economic inequality and wealth inequality, rooted in, as you mentioned earlier, the genocide of Native Americans, the enslavement of African Americans and black folks? Why is it that we have allowed those vestiges to create a caste system in our country that all of us have somehow become complicit in? Instead of demanding that the conditions that made you or whomever successful be given to every person as a right for them being here. Not for any other reason, but everybody has a right to good housing. Everybody has a right to clean water. Everybody has a right to clean air. Everybody has a right to clean soil. These things shouldn't be privileges. And so we have to have a paradigm shift in our belief about what our rights are and the value of every individual's life. I'm so tired of people. I'm stop. But I'm tired of people.
You're just getting started. Come on.
Saying they're pro-life. But when folks have cancer in their lungs, you don't want to provide health care. How is it that you can be supportive of people's lives, but you don't want to do everything that you can to ensure they're housed? Everything that you can. How is it that you care about people's lives, but our country's children and individuals are dying from gun violence? But the 2A is more important. Like, we have a responsibility and an opportunity, an obligation. It ain't going to be easy. It's going to be very hard, very difficult. I'm going to keep dyeing my hair black from all the gray. It's going to be very difficult. But we've got a responsibility and an obligation to do more and to do all that we can, that the basic needs of every individual are met just because they exist. Because you are here. Because you made it. Out of the billions of other people that could have made it. You deserve to have the basic needs met. And we, as a country and as people in positions of power, have to force those who are antithetical to that position because of exploitative capitalism and all the other isms. We have to force them to still do right against their will. That's what good laws do. Corporations may not like paying more taxes. Some individuals may not. But if that is what is required for people not to die at the average life expectancy for black men is 68 years old, then that's what must happen. Especially when people, I'm going to stop, but especially when people trying to raise the age for you to be able to get Social Security. If the age is 67, and we die at 68, Keep going. Let me stop. Go ahead.
So I'm gonna keep track of his. I'm gonna stop. So yeah. I'm with you though. Keep rolling. So let's shift to gun violence. Right. I think it's not controversial to say that the U.S. has a gun epidemic. Right. So just at the base, if you could share kind of your general stand on the need for better gun regulation and what that would look like.
Gun violence, in the way that we all experience it, is a very unique American problem. We must hold fast and be steadfast in our belief and in our knowing, not just in the spiritual knowing, but in our actual knowing that better laws, such as gun safety storage laws, better laws such as background checks, better laws such as banning assault weapons and weapons of war on city streets and in rural communities or anywhere is just common sense to do. There are better ways for things to be that would save and protect all of our lives. And even though there are going to be those who push against it, even though there's going to be those who fight against it, who say, you just don't care about the Constitution and things like that, you say, you know what, I know some words in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence too, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal and endowed by their Creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life came first. But that is where we are right now, and if we have people, particularly in state houses across this country, who continue to choose the National Rifle Association talking points and Tennessee Firearms Association talking points over the voices of their constituents, it is going to consistently and continuously be a very sad state of affairs for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Constitution, because what's the big thing we always hear from the gun industry, the gun lobby, the gun enthusiasts is Second Amendment, right? Second Amendment of the Constitution, which we did a little digging, we did a little research, because you knew we would, and we were interested and kind of surprised to find a little about the origins of the Second Amendment, that it seems to be rooted in slavery.
Yeah.
And we didn't really know this before, but it appears that, the way they got the votes to pass it was to arm and protect the Southern slave patrols and militias. And it was the Southern enslavers who were the key swing votes to get that passed. So racial injustice, it seems like, is never far away from any of these issues, even if you might not see it at first. So one thing we wanted to ask you about was if you have thoughts on sort of the connection between gun violence that you've studied quite a bit and racism in America. And do you see a connection there between those two things?
I mean, racism is a part of the fabric, the soil, the whatever you want to call it, of America. There is no America without a caste system created by racism. Racism as a term spiked up after Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion, before this country became what it is, was the collective power of indigenous communities, black communities, and poor whites fighting the system. After Bacon's Rebellion, they burned down a courthouse or two. Some really, really powerful white folks got together and said, you know what, we can't have this happen again. Go look up Bacon's Rebellion now. Can't have this happen again, and so we have to create something that separates them. And so we have to make it so that the poorest white person always believes that they are better than the best, most educated black person. So they created this system of race, right, that told poor whites that you have something very different than poor black folks and poor indigenous folks. And here we are, hundreds of years later, where people still, regardless of their social class, will choose whiteness over their own well-being, because the commerce of whiteness in this country has created a false sense of superiority, despite the hospitals in rural America being closed, despite the lack of educational opportunity in their schools just as well, despite the fact that money has been hoarded in the top 1% at rates unseen in American history. This is our reality. Racism ain't just black folk problem, not just people of color's problem. This is an American problem. And when learning about the Second Amendment and its roots in slavery, it's not entirely surprising. If you read the Second Amendment, you'll see that it talks about militias and the states, right? The power being ceded to states. The initial draft said country, like the country being able to have and form a militia. Because the first folks, they were thinking about the monopoly of power being the monopoly of violence. And that the country would be the one that would be able to call people up to arms, would be able to call people up into war. And then the southern states, well, if y'all did that, if it was just the Union, if it was mostly the northern states, right, able to make a decision about militias, you would take our power away in the South from our own militias. And militias in the South were a little different. They weren't for the protection of the Union. They were for the protection of what was considered property. Quarterly is what one account read. Militias would go into slave quarters to listen and to hear if anything related to insurrection was festering. They would go and check to keep the people terrorized. These slave patrols, these state militias, were intended for the subjugation of black and African American people in perpetuity. And the fear that southern states had was that the national government, this new government, would take that away from them, would take away their ability to control and to terrorize. And guns, they have an interesting history with our democracy. If you think about that attempt there, right, to silence people, to prevent the Denmark Vessies of the world, to prevent the Nat Turners of the world from happening, right? But also, what continued after the Civil War with these guns? When black folks went to go and vote, these militias, these self-avowed defenders of democracy showed up at ballot boxes with guns to intimidate black folks who were voting, killing many people who dared to cast a ballot. What did the Ku Klux Klan do? What have they done? They lynch people. Violence. Second Amendment isn't about protecting some right of people to keep and bear arms. It's about keeping and bearing the right to intimidate and to stoke terrorism and to stoke fear and to have your hate be the decider of people's experience in this country. And so you see at the last election, people going to ballot boxes, sitting 100 feet away, which is the legal limit, with AR-15s. Because it was never about the gun. It was always about its power to terrorize and to intimidate and to be a visible show of force and power against those that they would seek to do harm against. That's what it's about. We went to the State House for a summer session, a special session specifically on gun violence, was what it's supposed to be about. Had to have security because several Proud Boys were out there with AR-15s and rifles, saying they're being peaceful. You could be peaceful in your house, but you're out here for a different reason. You are out here to continue the legacy of their inheritance, which was to terrorize us into acquiescence with the status quo, was to prevent you from showing up and speaking up, was to prevent you from saying something against them. That is what they have inherited and have internalized. Is you are too uppity. You speak too much. So the gun helps to move forward racism and white supremacy. Helps to empower this ideology of hatred. And so when we attack with love, because what we're talking about is we love people, and I want you to be here. I want your kids to grow old. I don't want them to be 9-year-olds in school and somebody run in on them with an AR-15, because we're talking about love here. When we attack with love, the response that we get and what you hear and what you should hear every time that you get responses from these people in positions of power, what you should hear them saying back is, I will do whatever I need to, they say, to maintain white supremacy. I will do whatever I need to retain my ability to terrorize. This is what they're saying, I will do whatever I need to maintain this dominance over you. while we saying we just want our kids to grow up. I'm going to say this last point because I'm from Memphis, and in my district this happens a lot by some people in power. They say, what about black on black crime and guns and stuff? We don't have a single gun manufacturer in our district. How are they getting there? In LA, during the crack cocaine epidemic, where did it come from? CIA, FBI, President Reagan's Iran-Contra war, right? Telling the truth. Nothing wrong with telling the truth. But we have to expose the reality that the conditions that we have put certain communities in have been choices that people in power have made. And now that we get the consequences of them, now that we're dealing with the reality of what it means when you deprive people of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, now that we're reaping the harvest of what it means when you don't give people good jobs and good educational opportunities, and you call them paths of least resistance, and then you do things to ensure that they cannot resist outside of being incarcerated. Once you create those conditions, what we get is an epidemic. What we get is the loss of life. What we get is funeral after funeral that we have to go to of very young people. And somehow let us hold the flame that this is not the way that it has to be, nor the way it has to end.
Yeah, right. Really.
No kidding.
So Adam and I weren't positive about this, but we want to try to draw a line between gun violence and environmental racism.
Yep.
Okay. Let me tick off a couple of stats. Gun violence reduces the life expectancy of black Americans by about 4 years. Black people are twice as likely as white Americans to die from guns, 14 times as more likely to be wounded by guns. When we spoke before, you said something that really stood out to me. You said guns are part of the air that we breathe. And that was just a very vivid, it hit me like at a very, deep level, like, damn, that's no joke. That's real. So in your mind, is there a connection between guns and environmental racism, or are those just two separate tracks?
None of the things that we're talking about are separate, right? If there are people who try and separate the issues of poverty from the issues of environmental racism, from the issues of gun violence, from the issues of healthcare disparities, right? Like that's incorrect. The interlocking injustices are our problem, rooted in ideologies of oppression that we are talking about and that we have to challenge. I really thought it was fascinating, this interconnectedness between environmental racism and the gun violence epidemic, because gun violence is a part of the environments in which we are finding ourselves. Right? It is as common as the toxic release inventory facilities. And in Heather McGee's, I talk about Heather McGee a lot, and Heather McGee's The Sum of Us, she writes an amazing chapter called The Same Sky. And we've gotten to know Heather McGee. She talks about the pipeline fight that we talked about earlier. But one of the main ideas is that the pollution is concentrated in the poorest community, in the communities of color the most, right? We are hurt and harmed the most. But the sky has no point at which it says, I've made it past the black folk. Right? It has no point where it says, I made it past the poor folk. Now, I'm clean and clear. That same sky, that same air gets shared by all of us.
Wow, that's definitely a lot to think about. We want to back up a little bit and talk about reparations for black Americans in general, right? Not necessarily, like you say, everything's connected anyway. So
we want it all.
We're not focusing on one issue. Yeah, and you've taken public position. You're in support of reparations. And just one quick question. What does overall reparations look like to you? Obviously, this isn't on your immediate agenda in the state of Tennessee for the bills that are currently under consideration. But let's just talk about it. You've thought about this deeply. So what would that possibly look like? Just the broad sweep of it.
You see how he said broad sweep? He's like, it's time, Justin, time.
We've got nothing but time. Yeah. No.
Look, I am a big proponent of reparations for black Americans, for people who have suffered in this society for centuries. reparation is repairing harm. America is the #1 country in the world for a lot of things, including mass incarceration. #1 for its ideals, it's a constitutional republic that's still around after a few hundred years, has become an economic superpower, a military superpower, has done all of these things on the backs of enslaved Africans, and has never admitted that all of this progress, all of its existence, was only made possible by the genocide and the theft of land of Native Americans and the stolen labor for over 250 years of black folk. Because I'm convinced if we admit how we got to where we are, I think the folks in power, principalities and wickedness in high places, they're afraid that if they admit it, they might be accountable for doing something about it. And a key part of reparation, a key part of what we saw in South Africa is you have to admit that wrong was done. So instead of admitting to the wrong that's done, we ban books by black folk. Don't read Beloved. Because what was Beloved talking about? Beloved was talking about enslavement and the fact that even when black folk got to freedom, slave patrols came and tried to capture them. And instead of seeing their children enslaved, some black mothers would kill their own children because she had endured slavery and didn't want her child to live through that. These real stories. So instead of telling that story, instead of America having to look at itself, you say, nope, let's stop talking about it. Let's ban that. You take the easy way out. I didn't enslave anybody. So the problem of reparations, the need for reparations in our country, it is about the harm that was done and the theft. They stole it. They stole people, then they stole the money, the labor for generations of black people, from generations of black people. But where did the stolen labor and the wealth go? It went into their pockets. It went into Harvard and Yale and Bowdoin, where I went to school. These institutions were Brown University is named after an enslaver. It went into these institutions that now reproduce the social class of the people who go to them. So now you get people cheating to get their kids into these fancy schools. Not because they're going to get better educated or anything like that, but because of the wealth that they know their kids will now be able to access because they got this school by their name. A school like Georgetown that was able to stay afloat after the selling of hundreds of enslaved people. And so the need for reparation is the need first for America to look at itself. And then can I preach for a second?
More than a second.
Then I'm going to wrap up.
Can he preach?
Yeah, can I? Just for a second? Ocean, keep me to time. If you encounter that one person who says they don't need reparations for being enslaved, agree with them. And my auntie say, agree with your adversaries quickly. Agree quickly. Say, okay. And then you tell them, you say, you know, there was a period of Reconstruction shortly after the Civil War ended, where black folks started to create schools and institutions like Howard University, HU. Yeah. Like Howard University and Hampton University, and they started to create financial institutions, and marriages became legal. They started to get married and things like that, but then there was an agreement made in Congress in order for Rutherford B. Hayes to become president that they would remove the Union troops out of the South so that the South could then reign in terror against the black people who had just made all of this progress. And so then if they say, hey, they don't deserve reparations for enslavement, say, what about for the retribution that happened after Reconstruction? Where all and a lot of the progress that was made by the Freedmen's Bureau and all of those other institutions and organizations, what about all of the retribution that was wreaked on them and the communities after the period of Reconstruction? What about reparations for that? Then maybe they'll say, no, they don't deserve reparations for that. And you say, oh, okay. Well, in 1919, black women in particular, God bless black women, fought to make sure that women had the right to vote during the women's suffrage movement. Even it became a caste system, and white women didn't want black women to get the access to vote, even though black women like Ida B. Wells and so many others fought in order for suffrage to happen. Black men had the opportunity to vote, but many of them were being terrorized. Many of them were being killed even for advocating for voting, even especially for organizing people to go and vote. You remember the Red Summer of 1919. You remember even though black people were fighting for this country in other parts of the world, in World War I, they would come back to this country and be mistreated and degraded. You say, what about some reparations for that? We didn't give black women the right to vote. We didn't treat black folks well during that period. There was lynchings going on, and many communities were rising against black people in particular after we left the South. And they say, what about that? They'd be like, no, they don't deserve reparations. You say, well, friend, okay, let's go. Let's just move forward and say, well, black folks fought in World War II, right? And they fought in order to preserve democracy. They fought against Hitler. They fought alongside all these other troops. They gave their lives. They gave all that they could for the beliefs and the ideals of this country. They came back to the United States of America, and even in their own uniforms, they got beaten. Even in their own uniforms, they were called the N-word. Even in their own uniforms, they couldn't sit next to us in lunch counters. They had to have a green book to find places that they could go in order to eat with their families. They had to do all these things just to try and survive. They were denied resources that other white folks were given. Hold on, like home loans, like the GI Bill and things that folks got in the Vietnam War. All these things they were denied access to. Certainly, they get reparation for that. And your friend, they might be like, nah, they don't deserve reparation for that. And then you say, well, wait a second. Over 4,000 black people were lynched. Thousands of black men and black women were lynched. That we didn't pass the Emmett Till lynching law until just a couple of years ago in the 21st century. We had Mary Turner, who was advocating about the lynching of John Turner the day before. They lynched her husband. Then she advocated about the lynching and said that was wrong, that was unjust, that was immoral. And then they cut Mary Turner open and killed the baby that was inside of her womb. They said, certainly for the violence that we wreaked on black communities and the trauma and the terrorism that was committed by people who were even having badges of the police, we deserve to get reparation for that. And they might say what? They might say no. You just look at them and you say, friend, okay. In the 1970s, we launched a war against black folk. We took crack cocaine from these seeds in a different country. And we put them in Los Angeles. And we put them in all the black communities. And we decided that if you had crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, you would go to jail for longer because black folks use crack cocaine and white folks use powder cocaine. And we ensured that they would stay in jail longer. And we proliferated their communities. And so many of them died. And so many of them became addicts. And so many of them were sick. And so many of them had miscarriages. And so many of them were hurt and harmed by this crack epidemic that was actually created by the President of the United States and was supported by the institutions of American government. I mean, certainly there's reparation for that, and they'll look at you and they'll say no, they don't even deserve reparation for that. And you'll say, well, okay, let's look at housing. We redlined them. We told them there were only certain places that they could live, and then we polluted those very places, and so they die more than white folks die. They don't have wealth the way that white folks have been able to have 10 times the more wealth. And you can say, surely there's some reparation for that, and they'll look at you and they'll say no. You say, okay, well, look, just move forward with me. That was too far, right? You've heard this argument. That's too far long ago. I wasn't around then. I didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't enslave anybody. I didn't lynch anybody. I didn't put crack in anybody's neighborhood. And you say, well, but you were a beneficiary. But you say, okay, I got you. And then you move forward and you say, in 1990s, the president and the entire Congress and the entire country were calling black people super predators. They were locking up people left and right and led to the mass incarceration movement that now has 2 million people incarcerated. Up 30% more, over 300% more than in the 1970s. Wealth gone from their family for generations. Breaking and shattering communities beyond any recognition. Certainly, there's some reparation for that. They'll look at you. They'll say no. And you say, but there's this gun violence epidemic that's killing more of them today. You say the educational system, it's unfair to them. They have more debt. They're not even allowed to get into school. 80% of black folks aren't even being able to get access to higher education. You look at them puzzled. You say, but you have a home that you live in that was your grandparents because they got and were beneficiaries of the GI Bill. You say you inherited that. What were black folks? What did they inherit from this country? Despite all they have done, what have black folks inherited? Without black Americans, there is no America. Without the blood, thank you, it's the truth. Without the blood and the sacrifice of black Americans, there is no America. Anytime this country has moved closer toward democracy, anytime it's moved closer toward the promises of liberty and justice for all, it's because we died for it. 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation not because he wanted to free enslaved people. He said himself, I went to the Lincoln Memorial together just last week. He said himself, if I could free no enslaved person and save the Union, I'd do it. He said, I got to sign this because if black folk don't fight, we lose this country. If black folks don't fight, we lose the Union. And in return, black Americans get a white lash. In return, we get an attack on wokeness, an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In return, we get a society hell-bent on saying we didn't do anything. And still, we persist. Still, we run for office and swear our hands on a Bible and on an oath of a Constitution saying these promises are possible. And so the call and the need for reparations, the need for repairing the harm is because our country has yet to recognize and acknowledge the horror and the terror and the theft that it contributed and the pain that it contributed that lives in our very bodies. And by failing to acknowledge the pain and the trauma of the worst atrocity known in human history, which is the transatlantic slave trade in the United States of America and across the world, Brazil had 4 million enslaved people. The wealth built in New York and in Boston and in so many parts of our country, and those are places in the north. You see that? The wealth built in New York and Boston came from the slave trade. Came from our bodies and our blood. And by failing to even acknowledge and recognize it, it is failing to acknowledge and recognize the vestiges today. The loophole of the 13th Amendment that helped to fuel the mass incarceration movement. By failing to acknowledge it, we fail to acknowledge it, the reality of what we are still experiencing. And so the reason that I am for reparation and repairing the harm is because America owes. America owes her people. And until we repair the harms that we have committed against Native American people, against black folks, against people who are poor, until we repair the harms against those we have made the least of these, as the Bible says, we will never be the country that we can be. But I believe that one day we will be.
Wow.
Yeah. Really. Yes. Yes, sir. Was he preaching?
And teaching.
Was he teaching? Was he making a case for reparations? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Wow, wow, wow. Can't put it more powerfully, more eloquently, more right on the money, on the nose. How do you refute that? How do you argue against that? That's history. That's facts. That's not opinion. That's not speculation. I want to, and we're closing this out. We can't do anything more than that, right? But I was, as part of my research, because we're trying to be thorough for our brother, came across a quote that you posted on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Yes, it says, quote, a Republican representative tried embarrassing me by saying I'm the most outspoken representative. So they created more rules to silence members who actually speak up for their constituents. I'll never quit speaking for justice, and I am honored to accept this award. Yeah. Right on, right on, right on. So we say big props to the most outspoken representative in Tennessee and in the country. Yes. Right on, Representative Justin J. Pearson. Yeah, brother.
Well, you guys are going to get a chance in a minute, so don't get too comfortable. We want to hear from you. And we've asked Representative Pearson a few questions, but we do have time for you all to speak up as well and be heard. And before we do that,
we have a couple of quick shout outs to folks in the house. We have Asia Johnson in the house. Yes. For those of you that were here for her live episode, it was very, very powerful. Asia is doing her part to end mass incarceration as we know it, and she is just a firebrand and all that. So, Asia, welcome back to Pay the Tab. Is Camila Moore in the house? No, but I know that Oceanae Argilliam is in the house.
Yeah.
And she got one shout out already from her fiance and partner, but she's getting a shout out from us. Oceanae was the glue that brought all this together, right? This wouldn't have happened without her. So big props. And to spread some of her business, she is applying to law school right now. She is already admitted to law schools with money in her pocket. Not to get into all your business, but with money in her pocket. So yeah, she's a bad mamma jamma, and this is a dynamic duo. So we are so proud of you and so happy to be connected with you. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
One other announcement to make, current events. Tony and I just yesterday wrapped up our first ever reparations course at UCLA Law School, which went really well, which we believe it's the first time in the country that there's been a course at a law school about reparations. And in the house tonight are a bunch of our students from UCLA Law. Please give it up for them. Thanks for coming. You guys are awesome. So yeah, it's your turn now. We're going to have a microphone available, and we're going to accommodate folks as best we can. But it's a portable mic that we brought around. So questions for Representative Pearson?
Just raise your hand, don't be shy. So I simply came to listen to my favorite podcast, and I was not aware that I needed to bring a knife and a fork because my soul would be fed. I have to tell you, absolutely beautiful. My only question for you is, what is next?
Thank you. Those are such beautiful words. We're going to write that down, put that in the office. I'm going to need those every day. What's next? Whatever the people and God will. I am very happy to be of service to my district. And by being hopefully of good service to this district and to our district, we are of service to our wider district of people who are in hope and in need just like we are, who are ready to see things be better, but not just ready and hopeful and just willing, but working toward it. Like, that's been it's hard to say benefit of the expulsion, because I don't want anyone to leave here thinking it felt good. It was one of the hardest days of my life. Hardest days of our entire family's life. Oceanae, my mom and them, who are all watching on the live stream. Thanks for having the live stream, by the way. That's so kind of you. It was such a painful day, and it's been a difficult experience. So I don't want to say it was like it's good, coming from white supremacists. It's like that's just not how it worked. But we'll say is the ability to come to places like this and to know what I said about that community, that not only are we not alone, but y'all, it's a lot of us. It's a lot of us in LA and Memphis and Lewiston, Maine, and Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a lot of us who really know that there's a better way. And who don't just know it, right, but who are willing to join a campaign and advocate for a candidate. Let us go to the ballot box saying, I'm doing this just for justice. I don't care. Just justice. That's all that's on my mind. I got justice on my mind. If it's the dog catcher, if it's the city council member, if it's the mayor, if it's the president, all I'm worried about is justice for everybody. We got to organize and mobilize and be activated toward justice, as heartfelt as they are for injustice.
Thank you, Representative, for being here, and thank you, Pay to Tab, for creating this space for communion and to have these conversations. Representative, I think we all agree that everything you said tonight is extremely powerful. I felt that your hypothetical reparations survey was particularly poignant, and I was wondering what you've found in confronting ideological, political, and existential opposition to be some of the biggest hurdles, particularly in conversations and debate, but also in taking actionable steps and getting things done, and successes you found, and also what you found to be what methodologies and philosophy you've found to be the most effective in finding success in your struggle.
Thank you so much for that question, and appreciate the word communion, just because that is what it feels like, is the communing of people in a very powerful, in many ways, spiritual way. Look, some people don't want to be changed, so they won't. Keep moving. It took me a minute to really realize that there are some folks who will refuse and refute and not be willing to engage meaningfully or thoughtfully. Personally, I believe the things that I believe 99.99% to be right. That's from like my skin being beautifully brown to there being a God, right? Like I believe this is 99.99%. But if somebody came with a more convincing argument, I have to have some percentage of me that's willing to change. That's just being a little bit humble, just at least a little bit. But there are some folks who are not willing to change ever at all about the things that you would want for them to. And it takes a lot of energy to pour into those type of people. So I have stopped, personally. It's not that I don't love them. But if you are a person who I'm sitting next to on a plane, I used to talk to people more on planes, but now we've got COVID, so I don't as much. But if you're on a plane and I'm talking to somebody and I start to hear things like big lie, right? Or they start to say that that's really true. They start to spout these theories like the election was stolen or something like that. That's not a person worth investing your energy. And people of good conscience and goodwill and progressive and liberal and stuff like that, be careful, okay? Getting caught up in those theoretical arguments that you need to invest your life energy into people who want to invest their life's energy into lies and into degradation. But there are other people who are willing to change, who are willing to have more conversations, who might disagree with me on a lot of things, but might be open to conversations about some things. Like those are folks that I learned in the pipeline fight, that I've learned in the gun violence movement, that are more willing and susceptible to conversation and to changing their opinion because they start to realize more similarities. Oceanic can admit to this. There are some conservative white women who are very wealthy who do not vote along the same ways that I would, right, in a lot of elections. But on this issue, they've been changed. On this issue, they're willing to be more informed. Because they got directly impacted. Now, it shouldn't take that, but for them, it did. Their kids, they went to the funerals of these kids. And they realized they had been missing in action on the most important issue impacting children in the state. But because they had been taught that it was a black issue, it was an inner city issue, it wasn't their issue, it wasn't their problem, they didn't need to pay attention, they didn't need to care, right? It took the loss of life of 3 babies and 3 adults at Covenant School in Nashville for them to start paying attention. And so now they're more willing to be transformed. They're more willing to have conversations, and we do, and we talk. And I've written for the Rolling Stone, and they were just in the New York Times. But at the same time, every time that I mention my white folks and families who are there, I talk about my auntie Lavonda Thorne Henderson, who just buried her baby a year ago. And I talk about Moms Over Murder, who've been advocating for the end of gun violence much longer than any child dying in a school in Nashville had happened. You know, you got to hold both things, but getting through to people is only possible if they're willing to allow you to get to them. Everybody's not that. And personally, I'm not going to invest my energy with people who are unwilling to be changed or transformed. I'll say 3 really quick things. One is being proximate. If there's a methodology, be proximate, be close to the problem, be close to the people who are being impacted by the problem. Second thing would be choosing a social location with the marginalized and those who are being harmed the most. We got to get proximate. Go to the places where people are, where they're not like us. Go to the neighborhoods and the food kitchens and the areas and the nonprofits where people do not have the same privileges that we have, because therein lies the majority of the population and the majority of the work. But then, and this is the end of the methodology, you take your privilege and your pedigree and you put it juxtaposed to the people who have been denied those privileges and that opportunity, and you ask them, how might I be of service? But when you both get together, it disrupts the status quo. It changes the way that things are in a very powerful and moving way that forces the individual to change how they're operating and how they're functioning, and calls into question their biases and the way that they act. And so we choose a social location with those who are marginalized and those who are oppressed in an effort to disrupt the status quo and to change the way that our country is operating. And we can do that community by community by community by community, interaction by interaction by interaction by interaction over the course of our lifetime. And that's what happened with the pipeline fight. Those folks in Boxtown and Westwood with people with PhDs and researchers and scientists and lawyers all in the same room, all equals, standing up against white supremacy, standing up against exploitative capitalism, standing up to the city council and saying, deny us this resolution, deny us this law. And they didn't know what to do. But that's the only way we win. It's the only way we've had any success in America, honestly, is in multiracial, intergenerational, extraordinarily diverse movements. And that's what we are in need of now.
Oh, Deer's a philosopher, so
Oh, come on, O'Deer.
I won't make this too long because I have my wife here and she's looking at me funny. So try to
Mine
keep it,
too. It's okay.
Yeah, try to keep it short. I wasn't even thinking of asking you a question, but when you brought up the fact that the differences in schools might be resources and how much that can have an impact on a school. I couldn't help but think about the school that I went to, which is surrounding this theater here. And I remember when I was in high school, going from 9th grade to 10th grade, I had nearly straight A's. And I remember that the counselor who was supposed to help me kind of looked at me differently, I felt. And I was trying to get into an English honors class. And when I went to him, he told me, the only way you can get in is if you get the signature of the teacher. And if you do that, then we can talk. So I went ahead and I went over to the English honors teacher and I said to him, look, I really would like to get into your class. And when he didn't hesitate, he wrote the signature on the piece of paper that I needed. I took it back to the counselor, and when I brought it back to him, he gave me a bunch of excuses. I guess what I'm trying to ask you is it just resources to make a school better, or is there something that you can talk to about changing people's mindsets so that maybe you can deal with whatever you want to call it, racism, prejudice? Because even if you add resources to a school, it seems to me that there's that need that you have to sort of address. So thank you for that.
One of the worst emails that I got during the entire, once I first got sworn in the first time I got sworn in, Omir, I wore dashiki, and paying homage to our West African heritage ancestors who survived the transatlantic slave trade, get on the House floor. Man, it's talking about you only need to wear suits, right? This is a place for suits and ties. The Republican Party tweets out on their own Twitter saying you need to find another job if you have a problem with the rules. My first day, seriously. You go look it up. They say you need to find another profession. A person emails me. They say, you ought to be careful what you are wearing and how you look. You need to cut your hair. You need to wear a suit and tie before people start calling you the N-word. And I remember that email. And what I reflect on is they didn't have a problem with a person being elected. They had a problem with how the person looked. Because you aren't supposed to be a representative. People who wear afros shouldn't be in office. People who wear dashiki, it's not you. Like, you are not the stereotypical or the ideal image of what it's supposed to look like to make it to this place. Right? That is the effect of racism. That's the effect of white supremacy. That's the effect of bias. Y'all have biases, but that's the effect of racial prejudice and racial biases that immediately classify people of color and black folks, indigenous folks, Latina folks, who are in places that are deemed so privileged that they only belong to white people. Right? How dare you be there? And this comes from people. I'm trying to see if I'm going to say this. But these words oftentimes come from people who are not as educated as you are, who've not been through nearly as much if you've been through to overcome, and yet they talking about whether or not you qualified to be in those places. So what is it? It's not their qualifications that make them question you. It's not their experiences that make them question you. So it has to be something else. They have learned this behavior from a country that has taught them that we do not belong there. And where did they learn that from? They turned on the TV and they say, you're a criminal, you're a drug addict, you don't belong in this country. Right? Where did they learn it from? They learned it from textbooks that did not include our perspectives or our voices, didn't have characters that looked like us. Where did they learn it from? They learned it because they were socialized in this country and in a world that promotes whiteness and anti-blackness, that promotes these ideas that are so pervasive and so harmful to a diverse and inclusive society. And so what is the work that has to be done? It is getting the places that do not have resources, the resources that they need, and it is getting them resources, two parts, it is getting them the resources that they need that meet their needs. And so I should have read books written by black authors that had black characters, that looked like me, that talked like me, that experienced life as I did, that told me that I had value, that my culture had value, that my history had value. I shouldn't just know about Thomas Jefferson, right, and only half of his story. You only learn that he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Didn't say nothing about all the independence he was stealing by enslaving black folk. Right? Like we get this very skewed history in our educational system. And so it is the fault of our educational system. It's the fault of our socialization that the images that we see, that the knowledge that we have received, that we have been accustomed and acculturated to have shown us to not belong. And the reason I know it's true is not just comes from white people. You can have people who are also oppressed, perpetuating oppression and marginalization and degradation of people who are different. Like that is because that's an illness we have inherited. That's something we have ingested. That's some air that we have breathed. And the purification process, right, the work that we all have to do to unlearn, right, the work we all have to do to unlearn anti-blackness, we all have to do to unlearn xenophobia, we all have to unlearn nativism. We got a lot of work to do to undo a lot of these ills that are in us, these prejudices, these biases. It does require us to pick those books back up that some people left behind and to say, let me read more black women authors. And then, you know what? Let me go to a black church. Let me listen to some different type of music. Let me look up some history of immigrants in America who helped to make it the country that it is. Let me expand my knowledge, my understanding. Because I think the greatest harm that we have faced is that we can be separate from each other. We can never meet a person who is different, never read another book about somebody from a different country, and we don't think we lost anything. We can go our whole life without reading a single book from a Native American person or a black woman or a Hispanic-speaking person. We can go our whole life and not think that we missed something. We got to reclaim our ability to learn and to know about one another because we have to value diversity and see its beauty because we have to fight for equity for everybody. We got to fight for equity for black folk and for poor white folk and Latino folk and Native American folk and Asian folk. We got to fight for the inclusion of everybody's voice, whether they be straight or gay, whether they be rich or whether they be poor. We've got to fight for everybody, so we have to learn more about each other. We have to appreciate more about each other's culture. We have to make room in this tent that is big enough for everybody to be in it, whether they sitting down, standing up, laying down, shouting, swinging around. We've got to create a movement for justice rooted in love that's big enough for everybody to know that they are somebody. And because you are here, because you've made it onto this plane called Earth, because you are here, you are somebody who is deserving and worthy of clean air and clean water and clean soil. You are deserving of a house over your head. You are deserving of education that teaches you that you are somebody and you come from somewhere. You are deserving of being treated as a person, regardless of all of the other identities that you have and because of them. That's the fight that we are in. It is the fight for our dignity as people and our beauty as people because we are in this together. And can I tell you one more thing and then I'm done? I'm real glad to be in this movement with y'all. I'm real glad to be in this together. I'm real glad to be in this fight of a lifetime with people who are ready and are willing and are able to contribute. Because if we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. And y'all, we fighting. So y'all, we gonna win.